Hello guys and welcome to this video of the week number 12 of our course. Well, if you remember, we have been talking about argumentation for the last 2 weeks, I think. I always dedicate a long time, if we can call it that way. I wish it could be more, but let's say a considerable amount of time to the topic of argumentative discourse. I personally think that this is fundamental for a teacher, right? Like, if you are able to argument your position, your opinion, your research projects, your essays, I mean, you name it, your life as a teacher is going to be easier somehow. Yes, we argument all the time. We are opposed all the time by students, by parents, by other colleagues, by directors, by different sources. And when I say oppose, I don't mean that it's a negative thing. Opposition is good, and most of the times, so it's fine that you're able to sort of sustain or support your argument, right? Now, what about those other times in which we actually receive some negative opposition? Because it happens sometimes, right? Like people, students, parents, coordinators, you name it, any agent in the educational environment may have opposition just because, yes, just for the sake of it. Maybe it's a personal thing, maybe it's just people don't like you, maybe you had a former trouble or something like that, and they try to oppose just because, right? So I certainly consider that if you're able to argument yourself, to argument your position, or your decisions, or the way you evaluate, the way you present your classes, if you have enough support, it's going to be much more difficult for people to try and just contradict you for the sake of it, right? So that is why basically I take a good amount of time, like teaching this topic, and creating like conditions in which you can practice it. Well, today we're going to finish with that. This week, I mean. And we are going to do it with something that is really important. It is a counter argumentation, right? We have spent quite some time discussing this way to prepare your arguments in a good way, to try and sustain your opinion, to provide evidence, to consider a framework, well, all these different things, right? But of course, there will be a time in which you have to use counter-argumentation. What is that? Well, if you go to the slide 108, you will see a small definition about it. It says, prove wrong or diminish the credibility of one by one each of the arguments of the interlocutor. So, when we are counter-argumenting, we are somehow attacking, and again, we can use attack in a positive way. Sure, it doesn't mean aggressively, it doesn't mean rudely. Basically, we are going to either completely eradicate the credibility of the other person in terms of its argument, right? Sure, you can do it in a personal way, but I don't think it's... those arguments are really... they can be effective until some point, or they can be really showy somehow, but they don't really attack the problem. So I personally try to never use that unless I'm, maybe too angry or something like that, because it may happen. But under regular conditions, the respectful and gentlemanly way to do that will be attack the argument, not the person. So we're going to sort of diminish credibility, saying that or proving that the other person reasons, arguments, positions, evidences are not so completely let's say valid, And this is something really important. It says one by one each of the arguments of the interlocutor. If you did a correct exercise on the diagram of complex argumentation, you will see that there are a lot of things to take into account. Yes, we have all these situations, we have all these facts. Yes, so probably some of them are stronger than others. So counter-argumentation is trying to take all of them and somehow make them less valid, right? Depending of how well prepared is the argumentation of the interlocutor, well, it's going to be easier or more difficult or sometimes completely impossible, right? But that is what we're trying to do. Try to make these arguments look not so valid, and of course using logic and using a lot of different things that we can talk, no? That we can use already. Now, there's something interesting over here, and it's that counter-argumenting should be easier and more effective than argumenting. Yes? And why is that? Well, it's really easy. It's easier to destroy than to build, right? It's just easier to spot the weaknesses of something that is already constructed. Yes, and I say I don't like the color, I don't like the way it is built, I think I could have done it better, right? And that's much easier than doing things yourself. But you know, that's part of the somehow advance of discourse of the way human relationships have shaped interactions and things like that. So just take that into account. Let's say that you could spend hours preparing an argument, and then somebody comes and spots a weakness that you have not noticed, something that you had not considered before, and he or she will destroy your argument in a matter of seconds, right? So if that happens, oops, better luck next time. Yes, better learn from your mistake and try to somehow prepare your arguments better. But this is something, let's say, that may happen. Sometimes people just contradict, and no matter how good is your argument, they will never agree with yours. Yes, and they will just oppose you. But well, that's another thing, another risk somehow of argument, right? Well, basically we are going to divide these counter argumentations or counter arguments into two main categories, right? The first one is contrastive argumentation. Yes, contrastive, as you can imagine, deals with comparison. Yes, you are going to compare your argument versus the other, and or versus another option, and you are going to find weaknesses, and you are going to somehow disprove that original argument, right? So as you can see over there, there are at least 4 subcategories in contrastive argumentation. Remember that we're dealing with comparison. Yes, you are comparing one argument, one situation, one option with another, right? So let's think about this argument, this statement. Bicycles are the best transportation means in a big city. Yes, we have mentioned that in the past, probably. So guys, that is the statement, yes, and that is the argument. Let's imagine that I want to counter-argument that. I want to say, no, that is not true, or that is partially true, or whatever. Yes, I want to attack that argument of the bicycle being like the best option. So we have at least 4 different ways to counter-argument by contrast. Yes, the first of them is opposition. Remember, always comparing, always comparing. So we have bike versus opposition. What is that? There's another option, right? So for the person that says that bikes are like the best options. You can say, okay, bicycles are used for transportation, for example, so I can oppose that by walking. Yes, so that is another option. I don't use the bicycle. I walk. It's healthy. I get to sightsee. I, probably have the possibility of being a little bit calmer, etc. Right? So that is the opposition thing. Yep. So I have another option. The other option would be like, well, cities are too crowded. What if you just stay at home? Yes. What if you don't transport yourself, but you just stay there, right? Of course, these arguments that I'm giving you are not perfect. Yes, because okay, walking have some difficulties and have some things that are not an advantage um, in terms of, for example, time or in terms of some other things, right? But that is an option, no? I can say, for example, that walking is like free. Yeah, you don't have to invest in buying an apparatus such as the bike, or doing the maintenance, like repairing it or buying parts and things like that, right? So that is a position. As you can see, for example, this argument that I gave you is not perfect. It is only like a way to diminish the effectivity of the other one, right? I can say eventually, well, you're not looking options. You're saying it's the best way, but what about some other alternatives? They may be good, bad, but they exist, okay? So that will be opposition. Now, another way could be substitution, right? Substitution. So, basically, I say that something can replace the option. So, the option that, or that the argument is sustaining is that the bicycle is the best way. The bicycle is the best way to move through the city. It's the best transportation means. Well, sure, I can replace it with something else. Yes, motorcycles, cars, golf cars, uh, some other things, right? Um, sure, a motorcycle can replace a bike, or a car can replace a bike, or a golf car can replace a bike, right? So let's say that the argument says bicycle is the best way to move through the city. It doesn't say the cheapest, or it doesn't say the less polluting, for example, but definitely a motorcycle or a car or even a golf car could be faster, and I get tired. I don't get tired. I have some sort of protection for the rain and all these different things, right? So you see, substitution. I replace the original idea with something else. This something else may be more expensive, maybe more polluting, maybe occupy more space, but still, sorry, it's something that replaces the original idea, right? So that will be substitution, right? Again, it doesn't completely oppose the original argument, but it just sort of provide some other ideas. And sure, let's ask many people, and probably if they would have the money and the space, they would prefer a motorcycle, a car, or a golf car. Not everybody, of course, but some of them, many of them, would prefer it in that way. Okay, so that is substitution. Now, we have a third option in this contrastive argumentation, that is the restriction. Okay, the option that you propose is limited, right? It has certain problems when you compare it with some others, right? So, what are the restrictions of the biking thing? Well, you get all sweaty. Yes, if you're going, for example, for your job, if you're going to an important meeting, well, it is out of the question. Like, you cannot arrive all sweaty. Probably you will have to have a change of clothes, and even if you have it, you still can smell not so necessarily good if it's something really important. Um, because of the traffic, there's a lot of different things that in demand, like accidents, yes, or imply, sorry, not demand, imply accidents, the possibility of risk, danger. Um, it's easier, let's say, to steal somebody or to rob somebody, assault him or her that is traveling a bicycle than somebody who's on somehow a car, motorcycle, even sometimes somebody who's walking. And then we have, for example, the time. Sure, this is normally faster than walking, but it is not as fast as traveling in a car, in a motorcycle, or even taking the bus, for example, right? So the idea over here is undermine a little bit the argument. Okay, yes, pretty good, but what about time? What about personal presentation? What about danger? And many other things that you can think. Yes, of course, these comparisons are always in function of something else. Yes, in the car you are normally not sweaty. In the car you may have accidents, but they may be less. Or if you have an accident, you will be more protected than if you are in the bicycle. Even if you take the bus, it's going to be faster in terms of time than this bike. Okay. And then finally, we have the direct contrast. Okay, it is. I mean, if the argument is correctly presented, it is going to be almost impossible to do this. Yes. Why? Because let's say that it's this argument like completely disproves, this counter argument completely disproves the original argument, right? It's going to disarm somehow. It's going to be almost completely effective. Yes. So for a well-prepared argument, I think that it will be impossible to do direct contrast. But sometimes people don't prepare their arguments. Sometimes people just lose sight of many things that are really somehow really evident, right? It may happen. So if you are able to be disproved by means of a direct contrast, it means that you didn't work very well on your argument. So what is direct contrast? There is something definitely better than the option proposed. Yes, there's something that's definitely better and simply has better options, has better qualities, has better ideas, yes, and better results, and it's not so different, right? So for example, you could say, what if you use a motorized bike, for example? Yes. Sure, you don't need a lot of money to do that. You have still the bicycle, right? And you simply do certain mechanical adaptations and put it in there, and it's going to be faster than a bike. Let's say the parts are not going to be very expensive. The fuel that you use is going to be really easy to get, and it's going to last a long time. And in the eventuality that you run out of money to put some gas on the motorized bike, well, no problem, because you can use just your normal bike, for example, right? So that will be a direct contrast. I am not saying, and attention to this, I am not saying that necessarily motorized bikes are much better than regular bikes always, right? Because they also have their problems and their restrictions. But by the way in which the argument is presented in a city, in an urban context, in a place where everybody's, going faster and faster, well, probably a motorized bike could be a little bit better than a bike. Yes? If the argument that I initially presented would say something better or more specific, let's say, in terms of economy or in terms of, for example, the environment or some other things, well, it will be more difficult for me to establish this direct contrast comparison between the bike and the motorized bike. Yes. So hopefully that's it. I gave you all these different options. You can sort of select one. Yes, you can say, okay, I'm going to counter argument, and I'm going to counter argument with the restriction or with substitution. Or you can select more than one, or you can select all of them. It really depends on how well prepared is the argument that you want to oppose, the one that you want to contradict. Okay? Fine. Now, that was the first option, that was contrastive argumentation. And then we have the other one, yes, that is causal or consequential, right? So close attention over here, because I know it may be tricky for some people. But here we have like 3 subcategories, yes? We have the subcategory of cause to start, yes? So we're going to say that the argument that I want to oppose causes another problem, or causes something negative or something bad. Yes? So imagine that the argument is the same that we have been talking about. Bicycles are the best, somehow transportation means for a big city. So if I want to counter-argument that with a cause, I have to imagine certain problems that are caused by that. Yes? There is supposed to be a solution for transportation, but let's imagine that it causes another problem, another issue. So you can say, okay, sure, very well, very healthy, very nice. But the use of bicycle increases the amount of accidents, for example. Yes, I can say that. It increases the amount of accidents because bikers are not careful sometimes, they do not respect the traffic lights, they do not use protection equipment, and using that will sort of increase the amount of accidentality or the rates, let's say, or the statistics of accidentality in the city. Yes? I can say something, okay, very well, very nice, but that is going to increase the number of assaults, robberies, yes, of people being stolen, sometimes even killed, because of these different vehicles. No, like they may be assaulted in order to be deprived of their property, and that may even increase the rate of mortality, right? So get creative. Simply, you're going to think about a problem that is generated by that something that is supposed to be a solution, right? So that would be a cost counter-argumentation. Now, another one can be the argumentation or the counter-argumentation of consequence. Yes? So you're going to say that, okay, that basically that argument may be good, but that is not the root of the problem, right? You can say, okay, sure, people can use bikes all the time they want, but that is not the real problem. That is only a consequence. The real problem is that streets in Ibagué are really narrow. Yes? And whether you use cars or motorcycles or bikes or walking, the problem will still be the same, because that is not the real problem. You're just attacking not the source of the problem, right? Something like that. Yes? So you basically diminish the credibility of that possible solution by saying this, right? Let's imagine that, let's change the example over here. You say something that you need to eradicate COVID-19 in order for people to recover their jobs, to recover their employment. Yes? So we need a cure for that fast, so people can have jobs. And that's definitely not really something completely correct. No, like we had a very high level of unemployment in the city even before COVID. Yes, it was a structural problem. Sure, we can have a cure for that, and people may return to some of their jobs, but unemployment will continue to be there, right? So that's a little bit what we can say in terms of consequence. This consequence argumentation is saying that the argument given doesn't really solve the situation, or is not really the source of the problem or the issue or the solution, but you have to solve something else, something different in order to do it. Finally, we have that of conclusion, yes, and it's pretty much the same somehow than direct contrast. It is just let's say to look for a really weak point on the argument that we are going to find in terms of consequences or incoherences or things like that. Again, something or an argument that is well prepared is never going to be able to be counter argumented by using conclusions. Yes, it is impossible to do that. So this will be only for very weak arguments, for very for really badly constructed or badly built or something like that, right? It reminds me, for example, last week of this argument of Vicky Davila about I don't know if you listen about it, about how using diminutives, right? When I call diminutives, it's shortening like the name of a person. How using diminutives may be disrespectful and making feel people worthless or somehow less respected or less valued or things like that, right? So she was saying that, and she calls herself Vicky, right? Which is the diminutive of Victoria, and she's actually called Victoria Eugenia, right? So, for example, that argument, you can just eliminate it by conclusion. You can say, okay, don't tell me about it because you're calling yourself, and you have been famous calling yourself Vicky, right? So you're actually what, disrespecting yourself? Sure. The problem is that what she's trying to say, I completely get it, and it's very valid. Sometimes you can diminish other people by using a diminutive in a certain tone, like, ay, mire muchachito, right? Or, oh, mire niñita. Or saying a particular name and then using a diminutive. Dieguito, mire, right? Great, yes. But the problem is that she said that in Twitter she didn't have like the possibility of making the emphasis on tones, making the emphasis on, let's say, some other aspects, context, of course. And probably she develops the idea better, and I think I understand what she means. That argument is pretty valid, right? By the way in which it was presented, it completely undermines her credibility. Yeah, and it's going to be really easy to counter-argument her by conclusion. Only, I mean, one more time on that particular context. So, well, that is the idea that came to my mind just right now. So hopefully we can get the difference between here. Again, remember, we can, if you're going to use causal or consequential counter-argumentation, you can use one or the other or all of them. You can combine contrastive with causal and consequential and all these different things, right? So hopefully we get it, and we're able to somehow understand these different ways or these different possibilities of counter-argumentation. Okay guys, thanks a lot. See you in the next video.